What I'm going to try to do is give you an owner's perspective from Princeton University standpoint. I would describe us as a very forward-thinking university, very much in control, very much in the business of how we manage our contract, our construction, our subs, our builders. Unlike other institutions who may take, and developers who may take a hands-off role, we are the opposite. We have a rather large, well, I would describe it for our capital program, of which is about $250 million a year in construction. We have a staff of maybe 40 or so that's a blend of architectural project managers, field managers who are people who work for me directly that have worked in the trade. They've brought buildings out of the grounds, they've been subs, they've been CMs, superintendents, people who really know the meat and potatoes of building. So we're a very informed group. And we are also a very, I would say, technologically forward-thinking group as well. So I'm going to go through some timelines to describe how we got to where we are. I'll preface it by saying any owner that you will meet has their own sets of limitations and constraints. I'm not going to say that I speak for everybody. I'm going to say that we speak for someone who has a lot of control. We have a lot of latitude in how we can manage things. And the beautiful part about that, and sort of speaking to part of what I think Summit's trying to get across here, and the feedback that came from last year, is we're able to drive the industry, and we're seeing it in real time. So it's a personal engagement, frankly, from me to the subs and the CMs. I'm out there meeting with them as we developed our BIM standards. We did this back in 2011. We did not do so blindly. We did not just go and say, grab somebody's BIM spec, it's ours, we're going to mandate, and then we'll figure out the details later. We did the opposite. We actually went out. When I say we, it's largely me and the guys that work for me. We'd meet with the modelers, we'd meet with the subs. We'd say, if I were to ask for this, what would it mean to you? Because in the end, it's going to cost me more money if I cause a problem. And just for a little background, I've just gotten past the point in the past 2 years where I've worked on the owner's side more than I did as a builder. So I started as an electrical engineer, had about a dozen or so years in the contracting business, direct owner of a company, then went to the owner's side. And I've just finished my 14th year with Princeton University. So I have a unique perspective from someone who's implementing these BIM solutions. I actually was there. I actually know what it is to be responsible for a bottom line, and I'm very concerned about that. So our BIM spec that we've written is really with the contractor's efficiency in mind, and it's also, you're going to hear a lot of this from me, it's BIM to FM. We sort of got over the euphoria of what a BIM model was pretty early on, and very quickly turned to what can we make usable out of this BIM model for facility maintenance and operations. That's been somewhat of an obsession for me over the past 5 years, and as I think you'll see in a timeline, the ideas that lead to the foundations to that started back in 2001 even. So Princeton's been around since 1746. It's an old institution. We have 5,000, or 5.25 grand undergraduates, 6,000 employees. It's a very robust and well-funded institution, so they're not often wanting for money if they want to build a project. They build a beautiful 100-year project. There are no slap-up projects on the campus. We are even building projects that still look like this, collegiate Gothic style. If you ever get a chance, or if you've been to Princeton, it is a beautiful park-like setting campus, unlike most others you're ever going to see. And it is a place where they collect architecture. So you can look at a building like this, and right across the street from this will be a Frank Gehry, very modern, twisted science library. So it's a beautiful place to be if you're in the business of building. 500-acre main campus, another 2,500 acres off campus, 180 buildings, 9 million square feet. We grow roughly on the rate of 1.5 million square feet a decade, and we're starting to run out of footprint. So we're in the middle of another 30-year master plan that will really give us more footprint to build, and I'm hoping that number goes up. So we're not going to talk about the first, several hundred years. We're going to start from 2005, roughly speaking, for our BIM journey. These are the sort of the typical slides you'll see, this is back in the beginning, the first project on campus. I'll cycle through this. Just to give some growth, the years are scrolling for you down in the bottom right. In the mid-30s, there was a big boom. Then it kind of slowed down a bit, and then another big boom in the 70s. And a lot of the architecture that occurred in this phase is architecture many of us wish they didn't build. It was very utilitarian in nature. There are many of the blue buildings that you see here that we have spent the past dozen years trying to fix, trying to make look more appealing, and frankly tearing down and replacing with more sustainable designs. These things were tanks, many of them. I don't speak for all of them, but it was a problem that thankfully our architects and campus planners now have learned from. They're avoiding that. And so here we are, 2006. A lot of the green boxes that you're seeing down here in the lower section is the science neighborhood. The green boxes, and then over here to the, I do have a pointer. This stuff over in here, these are about the most complicated science research buildings you're going to get anywhere. These are, we have BSL2, BSL3 labs, complicated buildings. This building here is a construction value, $350 million job, 300 hoods. It's a sustainability hog, huge efforts. So what I'm trying to get at, these buildings are, as you all know, they're getting way, way more complicated. They're not only more complicated for us to build, they're more complicated for our operations and maintenance people to sustain, which has been the underpinning of why we've been focusing on making the most of the BIM models that we get, which goes to the next slide. That's our BIM portfolio. So if you look at all the buildings on campus, the BIM part is an exciting part for us, but in the big picture, it's not the big slice of the pie. If we were right now at 20% of our total gross square footage, that would be a lot. So everything we're going to talk about now is exciting now. It is setting a trend for how the future of the campus maintenance goes, but in today's dollars, those other buildings are what's distracting our operations and maintenance force on every day. So they're going out there with 2D legacy buildings in their hand, and we're trying to get them to carry an iPad information and use these new systems to do that. Right? That's a puzzle. So we kind of have to mentally, in my mind, say that's not a problem I can solve. What we can do is make sure that we're building an operations and maintenance system for the next 20, 30 years with the technology that we have now, which means, and as the time is clicking, you're all out there building these buildings, giving me models. If I don't ask for these models to be built the right way, I'm not going to be able to give these guys BIM information on their iPads in the field for the next 10, 20 years. And I can tell you that right now, the operations and maintenance people in our institution and many others, they're not the ones banging on the doors because they're behind the curve in understanding how to get this BIM information into these buildings. They have confidence, I believe, that we are, forward thinking, we've got them in mind, we're building tools they'll be able to use, but let's face it, 8 out of 10 days, they're using legacy information. That's a trouble we're just going to have to ignore for now and keep pushing forward. This is a slide I might talk about for a while. This is the overall timeline of where we started and where we are now. So up here, back in 2001, we made what I know to be an early jump for institutions like us to go fully digital. And I'll tell you why that happened. It happened because we have very smart and very responsible trustees that govern our institution. These are business people. These are the founder of eBay, Amazon, every big company, well, many big companies that you live, eat, and breathe today are Princeton alum. They come out, and when they're on the board of trustees and they get a lot of money and they say, we want to do a $2 billion capital campaign for 5 years, they act like business people. They say, hold the phone. Who's going to manage this? What tools do you have? Do you guys really know what you're doing? So back in 2001, we were asked to implement a lot of project control mechanisms that we didn't have before. I came into Princeton really being an expert in CPM scheduling and project management tool technology that I had used as a contractor, to defend myself, honestly. And when we came into Princeton, one of the first things we had to do was go digital. We had to have a collaborative web project management tool. We had to have everybody pulling information into one spot. That's more or less commonplace now, in my opinion. But back then, it was not commonplace. We bought a tool that we customized, and from the day we hired an architect to start sketching, everything was posted into a collaborative web tool. The reference I'll use for that for later slides is PCS, Princeton Collaborative System. And it's gone over 2 iterations. But back in the day, we were collecting all this information, gathering it up, volumes and volumes and volumes. All our submittal workflows, our RFIs, everything was going digital. For anybody interested, that culture change I drove that culture change. I was responsible for making this thing work and try to get plumber shops, electrical shops, all these other trades to say, you need to drop the paper on this job, we're going all electrical. They're like, you're high, I'm not gonna do that. It's too much. That's a 5-year culture change for us. So as we moved into BIM, thankfully for that exercise, I'm a little more patient going into the BIM learning curve because I expect the same thing and I'm seeing the same thing. So here we are, we're building 5 years worth of digital workflows and documents, and most importantly, buy-in. We're actually getting our operations and maintenance folks to have some confidence that we're on the right track, and we have them in mind. We went on with this path here for quite a while, and then it wasn't up until 2006 we had our first BIM job. I'll pause right there and say the front end of this whole story is not common. More common are owners that they were doing a lot of 2D, there might have been some digital stuff going on, and then boom, a BIM model drops in their lap, and they're talking to their other peer institutions going, what are you doing with BIM? And they start going, I don't know, I guess I gotta do something. They go grab somebody's BIM spec, they throw out the mandates, and they really don't know what they want out of this thing. We were very fortunate, having done this, that when this digital information was stacked up in our databases and the first BIM model dropped in, and we jumped in enthusiastically to the BIM model, it occurred to me at that point that I was actually trying to build a commissioning workflow using the collaborative web tool. That's how it happened for me. We didn't have a good commissioning tool, so we were getting yelled at because a system would break down. We had no documentation, and if we did, it was filed on our digital location, but it wasn't easy to find. So I built a commissioning application that would bundle the documents together for each commissionable asset. It was called a commissioning log. So we build a database, we say, let's predefine all the commissionable pieces of equipment and systems in the building, and I will figure out a way through the submittal workflow to link those documents to the commissioning thing. Long story short, in the end of the job, we would have a database of all the commissionable systems, and they would already be bundled with all the supporting documentation. And I placed in that same record nameplate information, otherwise known as PU COBie information. We'll stop there a minute and talk about COBie. COBie is a format to be used for guidance, is our opinion, is our approach. In the same way we didn't just grab a template for BIM standards, we didn't just grab a template for COBie. We looked internally, we asked our operations and maintenance people, what does Maximo, their CMMS system, what COBie information do they want? That set our PU COBie standards. And we started placing nameplate and COBie information into that tool. So back in this phase, we had that stuff in our pocket. We were starting to amass all that information. It was therefore very easy to look at a model that came by and realize if I can just get these models tagged and linked to this data source, I could start to have a virtual FM environment where people could come into the model, click on a piece of equipment, and it would grab that information. That was the concept. It hit like a brick right back here. It was so clear that's what we needed to be doing. But how do you do it? How did you get there? I mean, the list is rather long. We had subs who were just trying to figure out how to do BIM. We had architects and designers who had, they could kind of fake it. They could kind of draw it. but it wasn't really done. It wasn't really coordinated. And then we as an owner didn't really understand. So there was this immersion. We as an owner we got really immersed in this. We were the ones setting the table, running the job, saying to the AE, saying to the subs, you're going to do this part, and you're going to do this part, and stop yelling at him, and you stop yelling at her. And we were doing this on and on and on. We learned a lot very fast on how this whole dynamic, and all the while, through all these personal dynamics, that was informing our BIM standards. So by the time it came for us to have to publish a BIM standard, which came sort of over in this phase. It started here, this learning that I'm describing now, it started here because we were sitting in these BIM meetings figuring out what we really needed to do to avoid a conflict and make it more productive. And it also took this time, very frankly, for the industry to sort of go through their learning curve. The subs and the builders, my experiences in, they react very quickly. Many of them have already been doing, the mechanical trades have been doing this for a long time. They were looking for an owner to say, I know what I want. Here it is in your contract. I've written a spec for it. You give me that, and you're golden. And then at the same time, we're working with the AEs maybe a little more subtly, a little more touchy-feely kind of thing, to try to get them to come along and prove their design. Okay, so here's the timeline of our BIM projects. Not much to learn here other than the real hit started here. We started writing our BIM spec, and this was a lot of learning, sharing, and driving the industry. Phase 1, digital information collection. Phase 2, models linked to the library. I threw out here 4 main components of things that really were the building blocks of how we went about this approach. The first thing is tech reviews, and tech reviews are nothing more than operations and maintenance engagement in the process. If the people you're building the building for don't feel they're part of it, they're going to distrust the information, and good luck trying to get them to use a new, more challenging tool to maintain it. This was a big deal. So the process that we have had since way back in early 2000 is a very rigid, formal tech review process that we built into that collaborative PCS system I described earlier. That means that we have defined from all the shops the key personnel that are responsible for commenting, critiquing the design. So they get 4 shots at a design package. And we collect all their feedback and push the feedback back to the AE authors in the design phase. And we require them to respond. So we have some history as to how documents evolve. They get their fingerprints on every submittal that comes in. So a submittal come in, we have 2 people that act as point people. They delegate the review and approval authority to the different trade shops. Those shops' responses are tracked. They're basically marking up the submittal at the same time the AE's marking up the submittal. Ultimately, the AE is responsible for final approval, but all their fingerprints are all over everything. So in the end, and this happened a lot, in the end, when they come to me after the job's built and say, you didn't build it the way I wanted, I can pull up a record and say, your fingerprints are all over this. This is exactly where you should have complained if you didn't like it. Or, you're right, you made a comment, we missed it, we'll fix it next time. So this was hugely important. I apologize, that's me. It could be. Yeah, so I want to thank US Air for a new outfit because my baggage is in LAX or maybe just arrived in Melbourne. So it's been thanks to Summit and team, they've been great. When things like this happen, it's good to have guys behind you. Okay, so this was a hugely important thing. This BEL list is the commissioning log. So that commissioning log evolved really nicely. And I'm going to show you some slides of that. This was just one of those places where if you didn't have the aggregation of maintainable information in one place, good luck trying to turn a BIM to an FM model into a workable tool. The PCS rebuild is a bit of a tangential information, but it was important in that we had this PCS tool that we used for 10 years, a huge library of information, and then guess what? The software just sort of didn't age well. It got old, it wasn't flexible, it didn't want to work nicely with other databases, and we finally had to go to a new platform. We rebuilt, we customized our own, a SharePoint environment, because, for many reasons, and it's really worked very well. And one of the beautiful parts is when you rebuild a tool that is a tried and tested tool, you always make the next one better. You learn a lot about how people communicate, how they, you know what this comes down to? Document management. You learned that part of the reason PCS in the beginning was having trouble is people were filing their documents in places that they couldn't find them later. It was not consistent job to job. We fixed that in the new one. So for the past 3 years now, we've had a new PCS that's working even better, and then I'm going to show you how, thanks to that change, it's integrated with our BIM models in a way that could not have been possible had we not jumped. And I'm going to talk a lot about the BIM 360 Glue platform. What I will describe here is we got our spec development, and here's the story that's going on in my mind. We know what we want to do with the model. I think I have a slide coming up here. This is the model of the tech review process. It's a flow diagram, but I already described it. It's fingerprints all over, but fundamentally important to getting buy-in. This is the BEL. This is just a screenshot of how all this information is aggregated. So to the left, you'll see that there's a list of all the maintainable elements and or systems, and these things are all, there's a code, I'll get into it. They all link these middle counts. So this item up here has 4 embedded documents. If you click on that thing, you're going to find out exactly the documentation that was submitted, approved, commissioned, tested for that maintainable piece of equipment. And this is how it works in today's, I'm going to jump into the BEL now. So it's a database that has all our maintainable systems and or equipment. And this same table asks for some sort of COBie-like information. We use master format system coding at 2 tiers to make these records unique. And I'll show you later why that is. So when someone goes into our PCS and creates a new submittal, this is being done by the subs and the CMs. They go into the SharePoint site, and they drop in a new submittal, and it prompts them for COBie information for master format. It says, what spec section is this? And as soon as you type in the first number, it says, hold on, I have 2 other similar code master spec format pieces of equipment that are in the database. Would you like to associate this document, really, with either of those? You can select one or many, and it automatically inserts that into the record. So that's the tool that's going on every day. It's really important. So when we first started off with this, the only way we had to link this new, the PCS generates a URL for every one of these records. I'm going to go back. This is the earlier version of the PCS. It has a unique URL. And the only way we could share that URL with the model was to drop it in as a property set. Ugh. That's a hassle. The URL not only is not sustainable as an address for a piece of documentation, once that documentation or URL gets updated or moved, but it was a hassle to derive the things, give them to the subs, and say, okay, subs, it worked on some jobs. The subs would drop them into the models in a property set. We'd be able to validate that, and we'd be able to click on that in the model, and it would bring into SharePoint. It worked great, but it was beholden on a URL placement. So that didn't work. So then Autodesk came and said, you should try, I missed a part here. Early on, here's the other big thing we were missing. We have these models, and these models are being done by the subs with Revit, Autodesk, AutoCAD MEP, and they're using Navisworks to do all their coordination, right? That's kind of the bread and butter, how everybody does it in our area anywhere. But these are all big authoring tools. There's no way I'm going to get a field operations person to use any of those tools. They're plumbers and electricians and carpenters, right? And what was happening at the same time we were figuring this out, their new boss came in and said, we're going to get better at work orders, and he starts handing out iPads to everybody. Oh, they loved it. So they're doing their work orders on iPads. We had to have the interface work on an iPad. I found a company back then that was called Horizontal Glue. It had just started up, and they had combined the Navisworks, computing engine with YouTube streaming technology, and basically developed a cloud-based system that Autodesk is now using for the BIM 360 platform. So, not to get too technical, but your handheld is simple. Is anybody here familiar with BIM 360? Okay, so enough. So this stuff is the cloud computing is being done out in the cloud. It's pulling information from the models that the sub have generated, and it is looking at what the viewer wants to see on their iPad, and it streams to them only what they need to see from their vantage point. Unlike Navisworks or Revit, which is calculating the entire geometry of the model and all the data. It's a huge behemoth of information. So Glue is simply streaming you what you need to see. If you pan around, it shows you a different area of the building. If you click on information, it's pulling from the cloud the intelligence that I wanted placed in that model for that piece of equipment. This works for operations and maintenance folks. This they love. This they can do. That became the basis. We have to have something that works on an iPad. Well, the only thing there was horizontal glue. Autodesk bought horizontal glue, and now it became one of the main components of the BIM 360 platform, now known as BIM 360 Glue. So that was a tool in our tool chest. Autodesk was then saying, but I was still stuck with the URL problem, and Autodesk said, listen, we bought this other product called Vela Systems. It's like a commissioning issue tracking tool. It's a database for tracking that kind of stuff. We think we can get it to work for you as an integrative tool to link the glue with the PCS. I said, well, if you get me that, I'm in, because that is the third leg of the stool that I need. So this is how it works. Pretty simple. We've got field, which is collecting. So we've changed now. The nameplate information that I used to collect in PCS, I'm now collecting in field. So this has become the data repository. This has become the document repository. And field is also acting as the integrative tool with glue. So when I have an asset that is coded, all it has to be coded with is the tag. That's all I need. I just need the BEL tag placed in that asset. As soon as I've done that, the SharePoint integration recognizes that. It pulls nameplates for the same tag. It pulls documents for the same tag, and it pushes it out to the user on their iPad in the field. Here's a more complicated drawing of the same thing. We've got the tag in here, different various models, the submittals linked to the BELs. It's pushing it into here, and BIM 360 field is aggregating it all together based on that tag for that sprocket. I'll pause a moment because I had to delete. Let's talk about our requirements for deliverables. One thing that is unique about the approach that I've taken for a long time is to not mandate Revit. Because as I was interviewing subs and finding out how they do it in our industry, and I'm very interested to find out how it is here, but in our industry, most of our MEP subs are still modeling in MEP AutoCAD. It talks to their machinery, it's how they model. Revit is not quite there, and I've talked to many. It's not quite there. And that also went along with another sort of fundamental approach that we took was, let's go to the BIM and keep the intelligence outside of the model. I don't want the model all loaded up with all kinds of stuff. I've got a system in BIM 360 that is part of the normal workflow. It's capturing the information because it's going to go through a commissioning process. Well, that's fine. Let it stay there. That way, you know what? I can get, I didn't mention that part, but Field is also the university commissioning platform. So it's collecting nameplate information. It's what's being used by the commissioning agent to test everything. And it's also serving as the integration. So everything I have as far as COBie information is already in a source. I would never try to take, the documents are being processed through all the normal construction workflows in PCS. I don't need anything else in the BIM model. I kind of love it that way. Let the platforms do what they want. If Revit goes up or down or changes color, so be it. All I need is the geometry and the file naming system in the BIM model, but my intelligence is elsewhere, and I like it that way. And there are many other owners who have taken the approach, I'm going with a Revit mandate, I want a Revit model delivered to me, and when you ask them, well, how are the subs giving you the Revit model? They get a little uncomfortable talking about it because they don't seem to want to recognize that many of these subs they're doing it, they're charging you, and they're redrawing their model. I don't want anybody redrawing anything. Okay, so I talked about this. I talked about the document management system. This is the file structure that when we looked at our 10-year, 12 years of how our old documents were collected, all our submittals, RFIs, drawings, we learned from that we needed to develop sort of an EDMS, Electric Document Management System protocol, light. Not a heavy one, but a light one. And this is our own version of a light one. It does a certain amount of attribute inquiry. When you post a document, based on that response, it then requires you to fill out one or two different tiers of that. We now have a library that is a lot more database-like. It's a lot easier to search and find with minimal clicks the actual current record set of drawings, the actual SK log, sketch log that the project team is using now. And this diagram is just showing the role of the BIM 360 field. And this is very much doing the same. So let's talk about another fundamental difference. So our as-built, our FM model, is a compilation of the architectural Revit model. It's the only design model that we use in the end of the day. So the MEPs, and I'm going to describe after this, I'll describe the process that we go through. The MEP models are in whatever format they want. The Revit model, by the architect, I require that he maintain that throughout the life of the construction delivery. And I quickly turn focus on the subs as-built models. Our standards require, they require a lot of things, including BIM implementation matrix, a level of development matrix, protocols for the BIM implementation plan, the use of glue for administering and sharing this information. And it defines the file layering convention for all the models that they provide to me. So when subs come to work on a job, they know that in the end, they're going to deliver to me for a plumbing job. That plumbing model will be delivered in somewhere like 8 to 10 standalone models. Why standalone models? Because standalone models are what you need to be given to you if you're going to toggle the eyeballs on an iPad. If you look at the interface in Glue, the simplest user interface possible is when these models are standalone models and you can have a plumber say, I'm looking at a plumbing model at the ground level of this very complicated building, but I'm here for a domestic water leak. You're simply touching eyeballs, and there's like 8 eyeballs, and you can isolate that plumbing water system, domestic plumbing water system. So again, the stuff that we're requiring here isn't because we're making it up. It's because we know what our audience needs to consume. And those tradespeople need a very simple interface in order to toggle those systems. This also just has to do with, so in the end of the day, we get the MEP as built from the subs, we get the architectural Revit model, and that is our FM composite model. Fundamental principles, iPads, space ID correlations. I'm going to step back and just describe what it's like on a BIM job on our campus. We quickly shift responsibility from managing that into our builders, so our CM, construction managers. They jump in quickly as soon as we hire them. I'll talk about contracting a bit. These CM contractors are brought in pre-construction services to give us pricing, and they are there for design validation. So we bring them on in about, let's say, late DDs. They're brought on around late DDs. They're handed the design models in their current form, and their job now is to basically set everybody up, regular WebEx or face-to-face review meetings of the design model. They owe me constructability reviews. They owe cost information on the stuff they're getting out of the model, and they are there sitting with the designer saying, I'd never build it like that. That's not going to work. Can you edit this? Or doing clash detection. And for the first, that learning curve, 3 to 5 years, that was a very awkward dynamic to have a builder and an architect sitting there, because the architects weren't used to having someone looking into that level of detail in their design model. It's not something they were used to. So we're doing design validation with a contractor, and we really hire contractors these are CMs, construction managers. We hire a CM for pre-construction services based largely upon their in-house ability to do MEP design review. That's not something that was ever there before. These CMs were largely brokers for the work. They kind of waited, they get the drawings, they hand the drawings over to the subs, and they figure out the details in coordination with the subs are on board. That wasn't doing me any good to validate my design completeness. I want someone to prove to me, to prove to the designer that their stuff's going to fit in the, what do you call it, the attic sandwich? Or we call it interstitial space, right? Can you fit it up there? Is everything going to fit? Do you have maintenance clearances? We've got our own shops coming into the designer view saying, where's my block out for a fan coil? My coil pull, the drainage, how do I get to my VAV controls? We bring them in, we show them all the no-fly zones. We build their confidence, and we check the designer to make sure that the main components of this building not only will fit, but we can get at them and maintain them. Once they've satisfied that, we consider the design intent satisfied. They're off the hook, and now we're focused on the sub-coordination. BIM 360 Glue is being used for that first part, design validation. And BIM 360 View is also BIM 360 Glue is also our tool as an owner, so we can watch the progress as they go through construction coordination. A typical construction meeting will be that the CM is in there and he is showing the week's progress of all his subs on Glue. Our project manager, our trade shops are sitting there, not using Navisworks or any of these other tools, but they're able to go through and see that these guys, quadrant by quadrant, are coordinating this building in a way that is going to work in the end. So that one tool alone is completely to change the way we share and consume information. Before that tool, you would not have had a project manager, a field manager, all sitting around with the drawings, going to the level of detail of accessibility for all those spaces, all those pieces of equipment. Finally, some model stuff. I didn't want to run the risk of running a live demo of our field and SharePoint integration, but I will talk about what we are pushing, well, what our requirements currently are. Oops. These are no-fly zones, access zones for maintainable piece of equipment. This is just a screenshot that I pulled out of a working model about 6 months ago. So these are the kinds of places. A lot of this formatting stuff is intended, the formatting, the room space IDs, the way the walls are sectioned and the colors. This is customized to make it work for the operations and maintenance on their iPad. The file layering convention, all this naming convention, this is the standard that we set in our BIM standards. We wanted this named this. We're following an AIA 2012 naming convention, and we've highlighted the systems that we want delivered as standalone models. Gray water. These are the eyeballs I was referring to. In the BIM 360 Glue, this is the user interface that this owner needs in order to maintain the building. This is what they'll use out in the field. And I can tell you that that's a piece of work for the subs at first. So this is one of those pain points that I had to tolerate. So when subs go into the coordination process, it would not be right for them to bundle that ahead of time. They basically do it by areas. But if they don't know that they're going to have to bundle it like this in the end, they wouldn't know to name it correctly. So we give them the naming convention, they name all the files, and then as soon as they're done coordination, I have two of my biggest projects right now exactly in a neck and neck tie for doing these things. They're bundling their models so that I can see them as eyeballs, and they are tagging all the maintainable BEL items with just that one field, the BEL tag. And as soon as that's done, we have running right now the BIM 360 field custom integration, which maps all that information together. So if I had a live demo, I could click on that BEL item. It would show me in the Models tab that there's a BIM 360 field nameplate database for this. I click on it, and it's going to show me all the nameplate information that my Maximo users need for that. It's also going to show me all the documentation that the PCS collected during delivery for that piece of equipment. So literally, with one click in the field with an iPad, a tradesperson can click on that and get everything they could ask of me for delivering that piece of equipment. And what I have asked the subcontract community to do in return is to follow my naming convention, is to tag the elements, and in the end, bundle those models. And if you're not familiar with it, bundling that model, if named correctly, is a matter of minutes per model. That means a lot to me. If I can get that much value out of that little pain on the contractors, I've succeeded. The other thing is not just asset information and collecting that documentation. This part we have figured out now. It's simply just utilizing the system toggleability for them to do a trace out on a system. The next frontier is trying to get space information tied to points of control. That's a harder problem to solve. And to put that in other more clear words, if I have a valve up in here, they desperately want the ability to hit that valve and show them the downstream spaces that they're about to affect. Revit people out there will say, well, that's not that big a deal. Well, that's great if my sub-community is all modeling in Revit, but they're not. They're an AutoCAD MEP, and AutoCAD MEP doesn't do that. So until the industry in our world shifts to being a fully Revit model deliverable, we can't utilize that sort of feature of Revit. We've got to come up with a different solution that starts to, and we're working on that, and we're actually using the BIM 360 field and glue tool to test out ideas where I can hit on that valve and it'll show me all. We call that an emergency response thing. That's the big catchphrase. If I hit a building and I got a leak, I hit a point of control, or I'm in a room, show me where the valves. It's got to be bi-directional. I'm in this room, I got a problem, show me all the plumbing, the nearest points of control for the plumbing systems. How do I get to them in this interface? The other demanding audience that we're having for that emergency response is public safety. Our public safety department is very anxious to get. They don't have much, I was surprised to find out. If they get a call to dispatch, let's take a neuroscience building that we just built, which has 2-3 levels of not only security, but safety control for vivarium spaces. They get a call, they need to go into a space. They struggle for a dispatcher to tell that person how to get from the front door into the back corner of the interior vivarium space. And we can do that here. It just probably is going to mean I'm going to need to add a couple more paragraphs to our BIM spec that lays more space requirements on the subs. But I haven't figured that one out yet. This is that sort of emergency response zone. This is that vivarium building with 2 layers. This is the public space. And these areas out here are very highly restricted, as you can imagine. And these are some of the proofs of concept that we are playing with now. This is a room, and doing a query on that room to say, show me the nearest points of control on the HVAC system, we're able to start getting views like this. It's a good start, but as we got into it, it started to unravel a bit. The amount of fields required to be tagged to these elements, room space IDs, in some cases you'd be having to attach a dozen different space IDs to a point of control, and that does not seem practical. So I'll stop there and use that word practical. One thing I think we have tried very hard to do in everything I've just described is to be practical about it, not reach out something, it gives us this amazing deliverable, and not realize the pain points, not realizing what you're doing to the people that have to generate these models. But I think I've also explained that we are asking for a much higher level of awareness from our subcontractors, our builders, and our AEs. about what we want in that model. But it's largely organizational. It's not a lot more, board time. It's not a lot more mouse time. It's them just following. If they follow the standards that I've set for them, with very little work, they'll give me something that I can consume and render in these new, exciting ways. I do want to fall back to this slide because this, to me personally, is the biggest challenge that any owner has in BIM. This is a slide that shows you how few buildings out of our entire footprint are BIM. And how do you get legacy buildings into that new world? The one approach, if you're going to get somebody to live in a BIM world with an iPad and all this great information, and it's only for 2 out of 10 of their buildings, that's a big challenge. It's not something that I'm comfortable with. Well, that means you have to try to find a way to get legacy information to reside in the same platform as the 3D world, so they don't feel like they're in a different place. Well, that's a huge problem because the as-built for those legacy buildings are largely inaccurate. You could scan them all you want. They're still inaccurate. And as soon as you take inaccurate information and blend it with your accurate information, you've corrupted the entire sales pitch. So that's trouble, let alone the geospatial information that you would try to get. There's owners that are going into buildings, they're scanning the skin of they're doing a lot of laser scanning, converting to Revit. They're starting to drop assets in these spaces. And the return on investment is really questionable. Not only is it questionable, but is it really in a legacy building and they click on that piece of equipment, what are they going to retrieve? They're going to retrieve documentation that they may not have, and if they do have it, it's inaccurate. And how are they supposed to know if that yellow box in the corner looks the same as a yellow box in a brand new job, and that gives me bogus information? I'm going to distrust the entire deliverable. So that is the biggest question, and I don't know how to solve that one yet. There's owners, Disney is an example. We have many of the close people that were working with me at Autodesk, one of them went to Disney, and Disney ran into the same wall. They were going to start scanning things, we're going to do all this, that, and the other thing, and they scratched their head the same way I did and said, why don't we just wait until we BIM all the buildings and we'll just be patient about it? Because they turn their buildings over a lot more. They have a 5-year lifespan on an attraction, and then it needs a facelift because, well, people get bored of going to the same ride in some places. Or a new character comes out. They touch their buildings a lot more frequently than we do in that scale. So for them, it's going to work. For us, I'm not going to touch that building for, I don't know, it might be another dozen years. And if I do, it's a painting job, or it might be a renovation. We don't touch it with the same frequency, so I don't know how to solve that. So those were my questions. I'm open. How are we on time?
Pretty good.
Good? Yeah. So I'll open it up to questions. Anybody has any?
Hey, Bill?
Yes, sir.
Are you using...
Who am I talking to?
You mentioned Maximo. Maximo?
I can't see who I'm talking to.
His name, Plank.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So I just want to know, are you populating Maximo from the model?
So not yet. Not yet. That's our next sales pitch. So right now we're using the COBie information. We basically spit it out in an Excel sheet, and that's how Maximo is using it. As I described before, that audience is not banging on the door, but as they are seeing this evolve, let's just say they're talking more about it. They're showing more guarded interest. Well, because they're very protective of Maximo. That's their lifeblood. They don't want anybody putting anything in their lifeblood that they can't touch, control, make clean. So I'm very hopeful that that same integration from field to SharePoint can be built on the cheap from field to Maximo. So I'm hoping if you ask me that question in a year, I would have a different answer. So we're working very patiently to a very protective client in that regard. And that is not uncommon. Sir?
Yeah, just wondering, what are you doing in regard to future-proofing these particular solutions? So in 30 years' time, when hopefully Revit is superseded and potentially Glue is superseded. What are you looking at doing so that you can use the data you have now in 30 years' time?
Well, I think, I guess I don't know. I think the approach taken to be as light a touch on the model. The model is really a pointer to data. So I feel comfortable that my data is outside of the model, and I have therefore a higher level of confidence that if there is some big sweeping change to the software or the format of the model, I can still maintain a tag and I can still maintain system naming information. So I'm right or wrong, I'm confident that thanks to the light touch that we've taken on what we're requiring of the model, it can go through changes. That's why we did that. That's why we're not putting any other COBie or intelligent information in the model, because I don't know how it'll come out in the end of the day. And that was a conference that set my mind. That was 10 years ago. I went to a conference, an Autodesk conference, and this was spinning in my head, and I heard a woman speak, and she had the same approach, and I talked to her later, and it just really seemed like a very prudent approach. So far I'm happy with that decision.
Bill, this is Dominic Holst at AEC Connect. For those buildings that you have actually modeled, are you starting to extract data not just for FM, but really for validation, for kind of informing future briefs on newly built assets on precinct?
So I'm going to try to repeat the question in my words. Are we extracting information from the newly built models? You're talking about performance information?
Performance, anything really, just really being able to cost compare, validate cost information, total cost of ownership, these sort of things.
Well, so that last part there having to do with the Maximo, right? The money being spent in that building once occupied is largely in the operations and maintenance. And that data is being collected in our CMMS system. So the amount of work orders that they're applying on a given brand of a VAV or a valve, they're capturing that and tracking that in Maximo. And until I can get them to share the virtual world with that information, that as soon as they allow me to plug in the integration to Maximo, the two data sources are independent of one another. And the same holds true for our BAS, our building automation system, everything. We have a very robust, as most owners have, a very robust energy management system. All the graphics, the databases are all standalone. They can tell you in a room the humidity level, temperature. They can ramp down the VAVs, the whole thing. That is currently not connected. And they just recently, surprisingly, they just recently got to the point where their systems could start sharing information with field. So that's another avenue. I would say that those things are probably number 3 on my list of wanna-dos.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you deal with people issues? Like, do you train your own people, or do you train anybody in the supply chain? How do you deal with managing this process of change?
Well, we have a very lean crew, I can tell you that. We rely on, our principle is we make heavy use of these CMs, these construction managers. So our construction managers are hired in pre-con, and they now have to bring to the table technically adept BIM people. They are, right off the get-go, they are responsible for infusing that training and those requirements down to the subcontractors. As far as the AEs, we as the owner, we hold their contract. We spend time working with them if they don't have the in-house capability to coach them. Really, it's about setting the requirements. They don't know what they want to do for this BEL thing, and I have to tell them what they have or have not to do with that. So said another way, it's me. It has maybe I have 2-3 other staff members that are dedicated to the task of managing PCS, managing the BIM in the field. So, and I have one database guy. So on my side, it's 4 people, and we've been running it with 4 people since 2001. So it's rather lean. And that would not be the case if we didn't have tools like Glue. It is so user-friendly and intuitive. The training is, you write a handbook, you do a couple WebExes here or there. I couldn't train people to use Archibus or Navisworks, or Revit. I'd have to, that would change my staffing.
Do you get a resistance from your information group as far as your needs on the system?
No. No, it's very light. Because it's very light. We have virtualized servers. They give me as much space as we need. The Glue information is all hosted in the cloud. The PCS location is all on our local servers that we maintain. Scheduling information. So I have one database administrator. He's my IT guy. And like I just described, he's always been able to satisfy, and he's not even a full FTE. He's not even fully dedicated to my task. I'd say right now he is, because we've been going pretty hot and heavy with this field integration for the past 3/4 of a year. But other than that, he's maybe been 3/4 of the time dedicated to me. Yeah.
G'day, my name's ABD. I'm an architect, and we're pretty interested in interoperability and open BIM and using a lot of different softwares to try and get things done with builders. Have you considered IFC for anything in your workplace?
Well, we're open to the idea that if faced with an IFC exchange between different sources, we would tackle it. We've not had to. But if you haven't gathered, our approach has been the closest thing we could get to agnosticism for platforms and interfaces. We'd love to be there. So we try to make sure it's the way I think about things. It's my background. If I want a database to talk to a database and I can't trust that it's going to be there, I need to make sure the way it connects to other ones is flexible. So IFC is just one of those connective nodes that if I ever have to use it, we'll use it. Yeah?
Yeah, my name's Thomas from Global Scanning Solutions. I'm interested in the comments that you made about the pointlessness of scanning it, using laser scanning.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any benefit at all in using it during the construction, or do you encourage your subcontractors to use it as built?
So that's probably the strongest argument. Argument's the wrong word. I'm very keen on buying my own scanner right now for that reason alone. Validation. Here's the funny thing. I had summer interns this past. And what I have these summer interns running around doing is with their iPads, I make them dress up in very bright, clothing, very obvious, and they're running around with their iPads and they're validating the work in place. And I make sure that they're rather, apparent when they do it. And the message clearly gets out to the subs that, whoa, this guy's actually checking my work. So that's one strong message that I'm sending. And then the next one is to start using the laser scanning to validate the as-built information. The timing of that on a complicated building is a challenge. And then I've also learned that then taking that and reconciling that against the existing submodels is a resource issue. I don't know if it's worth the investment. I'm certainly going to try it, but I've learned we've done a lot of laser scanning in existing facilities, and you always end up reconciling the laser scan information versus somebody else's model. Somebody's got to do that. And it's not always the same, and then you got to figure out, well, who wins and how much do I change? What do I use as the authoritative model? So those are part of the challenges that have me paused. We done?
Perhaps one quick question. Hi, Michael Cook from MEP360. I just want to know, when you have your BEL, how you get that through each phasing of the project itself, manually or autonomously?
What do you mean by the BEL?
So you have your BEL that goes through your separate models throughout the project. Is it still manually user inputted? So from the DD phase, from taken from the engineers?
All right, so I'll pause you there. So we don't implement the BEL on the design side because I throw their models out. I use them to prove the concept, get me through the legal submissions that are required to the state. Once that's done, it goes on a shelf. and I've long considered by that point the contractor's as-built model as the thing. As soon as they start doing their coordination, they get coordination done, that's when they start tagging information. So it's really not until the coordination phase is done, they start dropping in the tags. If I had a better integration to offer, one thing that I'm not completely content with, it is still one list. SharePoint generates the initial list. I'd love to push a button, and I've told Autodesk, I want to push a button and have that populate. Currently, the way you populate equipment sets using field is not the best. You have to generate the equipment set at a glue, which is sort of, that's the wrong end. My list is here. I want to populate the records from here. I just want to hit a button and do it. I don't want people to copy anything.
Thanks. Sorry, Bill. I didn't want to cut you off.
Thanks.
But it's obviously been pretty engaging.
Good question.
Thanks.